So before we continue into the video, a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, JerseyFIFA.com, the home of all of the greatest football kits. Whether that be the new latest releases or the old classic ones like this, Jersey FIFA has something for everyone, and now you can check it out yourself using the link in the description down below. And also make sure to use code JerseyFIFA for 10% off when you order. Rest defence is one of the buzzwords in football at this moment in time, and it's a term that Erik ten Hag uses frequently in post-match press conferences. But the question is, what is it, why is it important, and how does Erik ten Hag get Manchester United to do it? Well, today we're going to answer all of those questions. So to give you guys a slight hint or an understanding of what rest defence is, first of all we need to look at some of Erik ten Hag's quotes. First of all, we have this one after a game against Tottenham Hotspur, where Erik ten Hag said this. Now what Erik ten Hag basically said was that Spurs have a really good attack, however when Manchester United have good rest defence, you can go a long way to stopping it. He also said something similar against Nottingham Forest as well. After that game he said the rest defence, apart from maybe really early in the game, I can't remember a transition moment. That again is kind of an idea of what Erik ten Hag is talking about, and then also we have this quote from Harry Maguire as well, after a win against Everton late on in the season, where he said, "Our counter press and rest defence was really good, and we didn't let them out of their half." Now again, that's pointing to a rough idea of what rest defence might be, but to give you guys a bit more clarity, let's talk about it. What is rest defence? The fact that this term is being used by both player and manager in post-match press conferences really shows that this is something which Erik ten Hag focuses on with this Manchester United side. But the question is, what is it? Now when it comes to the term rest defence, there is a bit of a misconception. A lot of people think that rest defence is the defending you do while resting, but that isn't the case, and it is actually a slight mistranslation. The term is still rest defence, but it doesn't mean resting, it's the other use of the word rest, as in the rest of them. What is the rest of the team doing on the ball to help the team defend? And basically, to give you guys maybe a better understanding rather than a definition, it's the way that you set up on the ball so that you are ready to defend when you lose the ball. So you're in possession, you're thinking about how can we score goals, but also at the same time you're thinking, if we lose the ball, are my players in the right place to win the ball back? That is pretty much what rest defence is. Now for me, the best way to use rest defence is to change from a game-to-game basis, and there are a lot of different influences that go into it. For example, how aggressive are the opposition? Are they a team which like to push lots of players high? When my team has the ball and is pushing players forward, do the opposition leave their players high up the pitch, or do they retreat back into a deeper position? You also have to consider whereabouts on the pitch their threats are. Do they have particularly threatening wide players? Do they use a front two? Do they have a really tricky number 10? This is of course something which has to be considered. And also just the pure quality of the players. For example, the quality of player which Manchester City use is very different to someone like Luton. No offence Luton, but this is Manchester City we're talking about. Now all of these things, kind of the aggression of the opposition, the areas of strength of the opposition, and also just the pure ability, is something which has to be taken into consideration. It makes you consider how cautious you need to be, kind of in comparison to how cautious they are being. If they're a team which leaves 6 players super high ready to counterattack, you need to keep players deeper in possession to be ready to deal with that. However, if they only have 1 or 2 threats left high up the pitch on the counter, you probably need less players in that base structure to have a solid rest defence. From a manager's point of view, there is also a big emphasis on the quality of players that he has at hand. If I am a smaller team with lesser quality players, I probably want to keep more players back to defend a counter-attack. Again, if I'm playing against Manchester City and I have Barnsley's defenders, I probably need to keep more players back to be ready with that. However, if I have Arsenal's defenders, for example, I might feel a little bit more confident pushing players forward. You also need to consider the individual traits of the players. Do I have good leaders, good communicators, players who are going to push and pull their teammates into the right positions? Do I have good physical specimens? Do I have defenders which can go 1 versus 1 up against a striker? Or do I need a spare defender in this position? Are they quick enough? Are they good in 1 versus 1 duels? There's all sorts of different things which are considered with rest defence. Another thing that you have to consider with rest defence is your own attacking quality. Now that may not make too much sense to you, so let me try and explain it to you. If I have a very, very good striker who can score 30 goals a season out of literally nothing, he barely needs a chance, a half chance, it's in the back of the net. Erling Haaland, for example. If I have someone who is that good at scoring goals, I don't have to push quite as many other players forward to support the attack. Therefore, I have more players ready back for my rest defence. However, if I don't have a number 9, for example a club like Manchester United, you need to push more players forward because you don't have a goal scorer. So therefore you might need to commit an extra midfielder forward to the attacking line. However, as a result, you do have worse rest defense. So again, that is something that the manager has to consider. Do I need to push extra players forward to try and get enough goals, but does that leave me open at the back? It's why teams at the moment are really going for good number 9s. Erling Haaland at Manchester City, Harry Kane at Tottenham Hotspur. It's why Bayern want Harry Kane. It's why Manchester United want Harry Kane. But also why they want Rasmus Højlund as well. A player which can score goals out of nothing means that you can keep extra players back and be better defensively. So yes, that is the level we are talking about here. A better striker, a better goal scorer, is actually going to improve our rest defence. That's the level of detail we are talking about when it comes to setting up the rest defensive structure. This now brings us on to Erik ten Hag and Manchester United. Like I said right at the start, Erik ten Hag puts a big emphasis on it. For his players to be talking about it in interviews, it must be something which is really drilled into them. So, how is Erik ten Hag going about building a team which has a good rest defence? What is he doing? Well, first of all, he seems to be signing a certain type of profile, physical players. Lisandro Martinez, for example, he may not be the biggest player, but he's very tenacious in his duels. Casemiro, for example, has very, very good strength. Mason Mount is a very energetic player. Things like that. These are all players which are good in their duels, something which you need in rest defence. If I have 5 defensive players, which are all good 1 versus 1, that means I don't need a spare defender, which means I can push the extra attacker forward while still having good rest defence. On top of that, Ten Hag seems to be signing leaders. Lisandro Martinez is someone who instructs those around him on the pitch, as is Casemiro. Even Onana in goal is that sort of character at the back, someone who kind of shouts and instructs other players. We know Bruno Fernandes does it as well. So Erik ten Hag is getting a group of players which tactically understand what he is asking of them, but also have the leadership qualities to make sure that the teammates are doing it as well. On top of this, something which has been massively focused on with Erik ten Hag is having left-footed players. And a lot of people are talking about this, Lisandro Martinez for example, but also Luke Shaw at centre-back, for what they offer in possession. It's something I've focused on myself. However, something I hadn't thought of until recently was the rest defence effect that has. So just quickly to re-emphasise before I make my point on the weak foot, rest defence is all about being ready to win the ball once you've lost it. So if I lose possession in the middle of the park here, it's about having my team in position to win the ball back. And this is why the weak foot is important. And it's because of this. Let's say my team is building an attack. Casemiro goes to Bruno Fernandes, to Mason Mount, it goes into the striker. The striker loses the ball, with this centre-back coming in with a big strong tackle. Now naturally what happens in this sort of situation? Well, Manchester United would typically attack with players narrow in zone 14 in this area here. Mason Mount in and around the box, Bruno Fernandes in and around the box. This means that for the player, the defender, to get an outball and get this ball away from his goal, he's got to hit wider channels. If he moves through the middle of the pitch, it's simply far too difficult. Most teams these days use a midfield 3 or sometimes even a 4, so there just isn't the space in the middle of the park, which means that this player is forced to clear more towards the channels, into this sort of area, where you might have a winger in here, or even a striker moving into this position, or a number 10 even. However, the important thing is that the ball is going wide into channels, into this channel here, and also into this channel here. This is where the weak foot is important, because having a left-footed defender, it is more natural for them to step out to their left and deal with it. This is something which I have to admit I hadn't considered when someone like Lisandro Martinez was signed. How does that improve your rest defence being left-footed? But quite clearly, it does, because Erik ten Hag has spoken about it. This is why he uses Lindelof on the left-hand side of defence. When it's him and Maguire as the centre-back pairing, he feels that Victor Lindelof is better with his weak foot, with his left foot, than what Maguire is. So he's better suited to stepping to the left-hand side to apply rest defence. If this was a right-footed player, it is much more unnatural for them to come in and win this ball, because being left-footed, it is more natural to defend with your left foot. I don't know how many of you guys actually actively go play football, but what you will know, for those of you that do play, is that if you are right-footed, you probably feel that you can tackle on your left foot as well. But I bet if you really think about it, 90% of the time you choose to tackle with your right foot if you can. That is why having left-footed players is important to Ten Hag, because he knows having this left-footed player means that they are more naturally going to tackle with their left foot, which means on terms of rest defence, when possession is lost on the counter press, that left-footed player can go win the ball back. And of course it's the same on the other side with the right footer. This player being right-footed, it means it's more natural for them to step out and go and be aggressive and approach the ball. So that's how the rest defence then turns into a counter-press. That is why it's important to have these players which are good with their weak foot. So far we've spoken about what rest defence is. We've spoken about a load of different things which influence how you set up your rest defence. And we've also looked at some of the ideas which Ten Hag considers when building a squad which is good at rest defence. The next question which we need to look at is how does he actually put that into play? How do Manchester United use their rest defence? Well, again, it all depends on how the opposition's set up. However, there are a few key structures. And it all depends on, like I said, how the opposition set up affects how you set up yourself. For example, let me put some context to this. If you are playing a side which defends, let's say let's go with a 4-4-2 initially. So let's say the opposition are defending in a 4-4-2 like this. This means that when you lose the ball as Manchester United and are ready to defend, where are the opposition's threats? We can see that it's in two strikers. Now, if you believe that this is a team you are playing against which doesn't have very good strikers, you probably are happy to go with the centre-backs 1 versus 1 against them. You're probably happy to push the full-backs further forward, simply because you don't really rate the threat of the opposition, which means Casemiro can push here. You can probably build up in a 2-3 shape, which is really super wide like this, because you don't believe the opposition have that much threat. You believe that your 2 centre-backs and Casemiro as the spare are enough to deal with these 2 strikers. However, let's say you're now playing Manchester City, for example, and they have Erling Haaland and Julian Alvarez if they were to play a 4-4-2. Again, they don't do that, but let's just kind of use it as an example. If you were to do that, suddenly you probably don't trust your centre-backs in a 1 versus 1 situation when you lose the ball, simply because those Manchester City players have a lot of quality. That therefore means you need at least 1 more player deeper. It might be a fullback, but this then means that your rest defence shape becomes different because you're bringing a player deeper. So now, for example, you might build possession in a 3-1 shape like this, so that your rest defence, when you lose the ball, is ready to deal with the 2 strikers. Now, if you're even more worried about them, you might also bring an extra fullback inside as well, the 3-2 shape used by Manchester City and Arsenal last season, to have that extra defensive security. Another example we can look at is a team set up in a 5-2-1-2. Now, you've got to consider, we're on the ball right now, but where are our threats going to be if we lose possession? Where are they going to hurt us? Well, realistically, in this shape, we can see that there's not going to be too much threat from out wide instantly, because there's no wingers and their fullbacks or wingbacks are super deep. So we don't need to have our fullbacks particularly wide for this rest defence. It's not a problem. So we've got 2 options. If you believe that your quality of defensive players is simply far better than their attackers, you can go man for man. You can use your 2 centre-backs on the 2 strikers, and also have Casemiro on their kind of 10 player. For example, Nottingham Forest, it might be Morgan Gibbs-White in this position, and you can trust your ability in this area. However, if you think that Morgan Gibbs-White might be a bit more tricky and a bit more threatening than what you might like, then what you might do is move your fullbacks more narrow, because we're not worried about these wing-backs counter-attacking, because there isn't the width from the opposition, which therefore means that our fullbacks don't need to be that wide, and instead they can move inside. In this situation, the 2-3 shape in possession is a really good rest defence shape because the players are ready to counter and get around those narrow 3 forwards without the risk of players attacking out wide. If you were, however, playing against a 4-3-3, for example, your rest defence would be very different, because we can see that suddenly they have a lot more width, which means you need to cover these wide areas. Currently, if you were to use a 2-3 shape, it wouldn't leave you with too much cover in the wider areas, so you need to find a way to cover that area. How can you do that? Well, you can either have your fullbacks play wider, and you could do something like this. You have your 2 centre-backs when you lose possession are ready to deal with the striker, and your fullback would be on the wingers. Casemiro is going to be spare. You're kind of man for man in the midfield. This is certainly a solution. The other solution, again, which teams are being drawn to at the moment, is actually to build possession in a back 3. For example, Lisandro Martinez, Rafael Varane and Wan-Bissaka, and then a 2 in midfield. Now, the reason that you would do this is because it allows you to, 1, cover the striker still. You've got Rafael Varane covering the striker if you lose the ball, but also Lisandro Martinez and Wan-Bissaka have the ability and the license to go defend in these wide areas. That's why we saw Ake and Kyle Walker doing it for Manchester City last season, because they were good wide 1 versus 1 defenders. It wasn't just about can you be good on the ball and build good possession, it's also about when you lose the ball, where do you need players? And like we've said already, that comes down to a lot of different things. It'll come down to the opposition, how aggressive they are. Do they leave their players nice and high? Where are their threats? Do they have a narrow attack? Do they have a wide attack? How do they do these things? These are all things which will constantly be under consideration by Erik ten Hag, and it's something which we don't typically look at, which is why I want to focus on it today. It's also why the relationship of the fullbacks is so important to Manchester United and Erik ten Hag in particular. It's something which I focused on massively when Erik ten Hag first took over of the club, and this is one of the reasons. Fullback is one of the most versatile positions currently in the world of football. Mainly though, we talk about that on a in-possession point of view, on the ball, what do they bring? But it's also very important from a defensive point of view, but more emphasis on the rest defence. We've seen already, when we're trying to deal with different structures from the opposition and different threats, it's the fullbacks which we are typically moving. For example, we're moving Wan-Bissaka deeper, we're maybe moving to a wide 2-3 to deal with wide threats, but when they have narrow threats like this, for example, something like this, we're then moving our fullbacks much narrower. This is why Erik ten Hag puts such a big focus on what his fullbacks can do. It's also why Casemiro is such an important player, and his relationship with those around him. not only is he an excellent footballer, but he is also a real leader and an experienced player. The same with Rafael Varane and also Lisandro Martinez. Players which are happy to shout, push and pull the teammates around them into the right position to make sure that when they lose the ball, that the players are there to cover it. It's also why it's important that someone like Casemiro has a good relationship with Mason Mount, for example. What we saw last season was that if the ball ended up out wide, we would see Casemiro making late runs into the box. We can see that this clearly has a negative effect on the Manchester United rest defence because there's no player in the middle here. This is why then someone like Christian Eriksen would drop deeper, and it will be important for someone like Mason Mount to develop that understanding of when to do it. But these are all things which come with coaching. Now, before we wrap up the video, I've kind of covered everything I want to cover. I do want to show you guys a few literal examples on the football pitch. It's okay looking at it on a tactical board, but I want to make it a bit clearer with some examples. The first example here is actually one of the games which Erik ten Hag was talking about right at the start of the video, saying that they have a good counter-attacking threat. However, we had a good rest defence, so Spurs couldn't really transition, and we can see that here. Spurs are defending in kind of a 5-3-2 shape, although this wing-back here is pushed a little bit higher at the time. But what we can see is that they have a front two. Now, Erik ten Hag therefore has made a decision. He's decided that he wants Lisandro Martinez here to go really tight on Harry Kane when Manchester United lose the ball. He's also decided that Rafael Varane is going to go up against Heung-min Son, and Casemiro is going to be the spare player. So for example, if Son decides that he wants to drop into this position, we'll see Casemiro drop in onto him and providing cover in that position. In this situation, we can also see that the opposition don't have that much width in high areas. Spurs have got wing-backs who have sat off into a back five, which means that the fullbacks do not feel particularly threatened. Therefore, they can kind of chill, they're in a relaxed position. So in this situation, they are an option in possession, they can receive the pass, but also, if need be, Dalot can come narrow to deal with the counter-pressing situation. And we can see it here, kind of as the play plays out, Dalot moves a little bit narrower, recognising that the Spurs threat isn't in fact out wide, that if United lose the ball here, there's not going to be a player behind him, but instead he needs to come infield to focus on the likes of Son. So this is how United used their rest defence in this game to really good effect. Now in this game against Everton towards the end of the season, we've got something a little bit different, and players are using their rest defence in a different way. The structure in possession is different, which therefore means that the rest defence structure is different. So what we need to look at is what happens if Manchester United lose the ball in this situation. But one thing which quickly becomes clear is that Bruno Fernandes is responsible for picking up Demarai Gray in this position here. Typically it would be Casemiro playing this role, but he was suspended or injured for this particular game. So Bruno Fernandes is there. If the striker gets the ball, that is Lisandro Martinez's man. But what we can also then see is that if either of these players are going to push forward, this one here, or this one here, if Manchester United lose the ball and Everton look to counter-attack, those two players could be threatening on the counter-attack. However, United in this situation have players ready to deal with that. This is good rest defence. Erik ten Hag in this game believed that his players were more than capable in 1-versus-1 situations. He believed in his quality over what Everton had. Therefore, he felt that he could set his team up man for man basically in case they lose the ball. For example, if he didn't trust his side in this situation, he might move Scott McTominay deeper and United could therefore build up in a 3-2 shape. But in this particular game, once again as an example of a different rest defence, he believed in his players, so the 3-1 shape had more than enough cover to win the ball back. We saw something similar in this game against Nottingham Forest as well. This was another game where Erik ten Hag was talking about good rest defence. And again we can see that Erik ten Hag trusts his players to go man versus man in these situations. So we can see Harry Maguire on the right hand side of the centre back pairing here is ready to go to the striker here. We can see Lindelof, the left centre-back, ready to go to this striker here. We've then got Casemiro, who is on the number 10, but interestingly, on this occasion, the fullbacks are a little bit more narrow. Now, what is the reasoning for that? Well, if you look in this area here, there is not a single Nottingham Forest player there, and there also isn't one where I am behind me. This means that Nottingham Forest, if they win the ball back quickly, they don't really have wide transitioning threat. I mean, if we look at all their players, they are all in this kind of narrow position here. They are all covered in that area. All of the Nottingham Forest players transitioning are in these areas. So what does Erik ten Hag do? He moves his players narrow. Now you might say, does he not back his players individually? And maybe typically you would. However, Morgan Gibbs-White, for example, is a very good ball carrier, and Brennan Johnson has a lot of energy. So he was maybe a little bit worried about someone like Harry Maguire, for example, being exposed in a 1-versus-1 situation. This is why he kept Dalot on the top here a little bit deeper, and also his left back as well. Now on this occasion Sancho had dropped deeper and the left back had pushed forward, but the idea is you have the zones occupied still, and still you are ready. If United lose the ball here, they are ready to win the ball back. That is kind of a quick brief dive into what rest defence is. It's being ready to win the ball back, being ready to defend when you lose possession. So I'm on the ball. One of my focuses is how can I score a goal? How can I keep possession for my side? But the other focus has to be how do we win the ball back when we lose it? This is why we see different build-up shapes in possession. Of course, some of that is getting an attacking net positive, but it's also about being ready to defend. So again, it's something for you guys to watch out for this season and look out for in different games. What you will notice is that when teams have particularly wide threatening players on the counter-attack, United will use either deeper fullbacks or more of a back three in possession. When teams' counter-attacking threats come from much more narrow positions, you will see Erik ten Hag use much narrower fullbacks in build-up. So let me know the first example of that which you see during the upcoming season. Also, let me know any other questions which you have in the comments down below. This is a bit of a new topic which a lot of people don't know much about, so if you have any questions I'll try to get back to you. But apart from that, I think we're finished for today, so thank you guys for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.